Mayong adlaw kanatong tanan. Welcome to our session for today. I am your instructor, Liches Tortilla, and today I am going to share with you the lesson in Module 2, Lesson 2, entitled Formal and Informal Observation. So, formal and informal observation is one of the techniques in assessing young children using the various tools of assessment. So in this lesson, you will be expected to define formal and informal observation, then describe the purpose of formal and informal observation, and explain the advantages and disadvantages of formal and informal observation. But before we proceed to the discussion, let's try to answer the activate part. And the direction is, you are going to provide what is asked in the KWL chart. K stands for know, what you know, or what I know about formal and informal observation. W stands for what I want to know, and L is what I learned. So in the what I learned, you are going to answer this portion after reading our lesson or after watching our video. Okay? So if you're done answering with the activate part, now let's proceed to our favorite discussion, the acquire part. Let's define formal and informal observation. When we say formal methods, this is conducted in a highly structured manner. Highly structured meaning very organized, very formal. So, defining categories carefully. It also involves constructing elaborate data forms, training observers and establishing their interreliability, and recording data, analyzing and interpreting data using sophisticated procedures. So that is a formal observation, a formal methods. From the word formal, it is highly structured or highly organized. Okay? Now, let's proceed to informal method of observation. So, in contrast, it involves a less structured and less elaborate approach to observation. But this method is suited, bagay ni sila nga method, for instructional planning and day-to-day program operation. So, informal observation is also called as naturalistic observation. Walang siya og normal, natural, which is describing behavior in a natural setting. So, informal observation may be easier and lack tight control, but this does not mean na ma-sacrifice ang accuracy and dependability. So, even if that is informal method, it does not mean nga dili siya reliable, dili siya accurate compared to formal observation. Dili siya, no? Okay, now another technique for observation is recording techniques. Okay, recording techniques may be classified as open or closed. So, this classification is based on whether raw data is preserved for analysis. When we say raw data, there is no such thing as interpretation. Wala pa na siya interpretation sa data na ilahang na-observe. Okay, for example, a narrative description of two children playing together in a toy house may mga bata nga nagdula in the toy house. So, kana lang siya observation is just raw. Or, wala pa siya data. Hilaw pa kumbali. Hilaw pa nga data. Because there is no such thing as interpretation. Open methods and preserved raw data. Closed one beneath. Since raw data are available to use as one may wish, then this is called open method. Now, another technique is the degree of selectivity. Again, degree of selectivity. So, kani siya nga method is determines how many behaviors are targeted for observation or recording. So, it differs on the selection. So, pila ka mo ang obserbahan or ang record. Some methods are very unselective. No specific behaviors are chosen ahead of time, and almost everything that occurs is acceptable for observing and recording. Other methods are the opposite. Naado ko na methods nga i-record lang for a series of time. And then another way of selecting is the opposite. The observer records only the specific behaviors of the child, or the specific behaviors that he has chosen to start to observe. So, kana lang specific na behavior iyang sundan o observe. So, okay, for example, a child is having an aggressive behavior, then that might be recorded in closed method. Okay. Now, next is inference. Inference is drawing conclusion based on data or evidence. So, ga-interpret ta o data ato ang gibuhatan o conclusion based on the evidence. Na ay evidence, dili lang kay tamo-tamo. So, it is referred for one's interpretation. When we say inference, we have to draw conclusion, we have to draw interpretation. So, it is based on observable behaviors but are not directly observable. So, anang atong mga inference, na atay mga basis sa ilahang behaviors. But then, we have to make perception. We have to make mental process through that observable behaviors, maka-create ba yung taog mga interpretations. Kaya ato man siyang gi-process based on the observable behaviors. So after classes, one of your pupils, for example, na ay naghila. So then, as a teacher, you are going to make a conclusion. You're going to make an inference. Maybe her mother has come to get her. Kuha siya sa iyong mama. Or maybe nawalan siya kwarta. Or maybe somebody teased her. So depending on the observable behaviors we have observed, that's the time that we can have our conclusion. That's the time that we can make inference. Okay? Now, this is the advantage. These are the advantages and disadvantages of using observations for teacher evaluation. So, as an early childhood teacher, observation, we have to be very observant with our young learners because that is another technique for us to evaluate these children. Ito silang obserbahan so that we can draw conclusions and we can have interpret our children based on their observable behaviors. So for the advantages, the first one is obtain additional information. Of course, through observation, we can gain information to our learners. So, for example, the evaluator can observe the interactions between the teacher and his learners to determine whether the teacher has established report treat learners with respect, and addresses question effectively. So through observation, mga evaluators, they can interpret or they can observe if we have established rapport tuuhan with us mga bata and how we treated our pupils. So observation also offers opportunity to see whether the teacher uses effective teaching methods. So kita nga if the teacher is really effective in his or her teaching method. Kung makontrol ba niya ang iyang klase o kung ma-address ba niya ang needs of the learners. Through observation, all those information can be answered. So, inaan ka, effective ang observation. Another advantage of observation is it provides instant feedback. Again, it provides instant feedback. So, teacher observations are ideally used for formative as well as evaluative purposes. Diba? Gina-obserbahan ka sa mga evaluators from the city, from the accreditors, mga accreditors in the CWD. We also have evaluators also just like you. Obserbahan niya po. So, when a skilled evaluator observes a teacher in action, he or she can provide feedback to the teacher about his performance the same day. So, through observation, you can gain knowledge, obtain additional knowledge, and also to provide instant feedback. Now, let's take a look at the disadvantages of observation. Of course, observation, naagid na siya bias, no? You cannot deny the fact that there is always unfair bias depending on the observer, right? So, all workplaces have some degree of bias. You cannot deny that fact. And schools are no exemption, whether the evaluations are conducted by peers or administrators. Bias is the potential to invalidate the results. An evaluator may impose his own belief about teaching on teacher being observed. He may not be personally like the teacher or may have unconsciousness biases related to the teacher's age, gender, ethnic, economic background. If an evaluator is friends with the teacher, this may be reflected in the evaluation as well. Okay, I know you have already understand this one. So, kung medyo suod-suod o sa dughan, we really cannot deny this biases. And we have observed this one. So, another disadvantage for observation, sometimes this might be unreliable. Dili siya, it's not true. Dili permitting o dili permima mas ma-rely. So, a teacher spends approximately 6 hours a day, 180 days a year teaching. The observational method of a teacher evaluation makes assumption that the evaluator will get an accurate picture of the teacher's effectiveness in the classroom by observing the teacher during 1 hour or 2 hours of his time. Many teachers become nervous when being observed. Diba? Kung gina-obserbahan ta, sometimes we don't know what to do because we are nervous. And sometimes we cannot perform well because we are very much frightened with the observers. I think that's normal. So, therefore, our performance may suffer. So, if the evaluator is an administrator, learners' behavior may also change, and they will not want to suffer the consequences of misbehaving in front of that individual. So the result of these observations can be often distorted data. So, mao na siya ang disadvantages, sometimes bias, and then, usahay po siya unreliable. Usahay we will be judged in just 2 hours or 1 hour na wala na po na perform without considering the days or years we have been teaching to our children. So, okay, to sum up, formal observation is highly structured, well-organized, and highly controlled activities. Informal observation is naturalistic observation. So, natural lang siya. It's either gina-obserbahan niya a series of time or it's either gina-obserbahan lang ang aggressive behavior sa learners. And we do inference, we do interpretation based on the observable behaviors. And then the advantages of observation for teacher evaluation is we gain additional information. It also provide instant feedback. And for the disadvantages, sometimes it is biased and sometimes it is unreliable. Okay, I think we're done with our discussion. Let's proceed to the assess part. So here is the instruction. You are going to describe the formal and informal observation. Identify its advantages and disadvantages by filling in the given matrix. Just like in your previous lesson, you have done this matrix. I know you are very familiar. I have already written here the type of assessment, informal method, and formal method. Then you are going to write the definition, the meaning of this assessment, when to use, kung siya gamiton, and then also provide 3 advantages. You may add if you can research, and you may also add based on your own understanding. And write also 3 disadvantages of informal and formal method assessment. And here is the matrix for rubric for matrix. This would be my guide, or our guide, how will I grade you based on your output. Okay, thank you so much for listening. I hope you've learned something today, and see you all in our next lesson. Goodbye.